Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and this is Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over 10 college football games for Week 5, Saturday, September 30th, 2023. Now, if you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to put your football picks in the comments section below. And if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, let's get into it. Here are the games in college football for Week 5. First up, let's go to the Big Ten Conference as Penn State takes on Northwestern. This one's going to be a 12 o'clock Eastern start time. It's going to be on the Big Ten Network. Now, Penn State is obviously a huge favorite in this game on the road. I think for good reason. I mean, Penn State's been really sharp this year. You know, it's like I said at the beginning of the season, it's rare to see a team win a Rose Bowl and only lose 2 games last year, lose their leading passer in school history, and then be still highly ranked the next season and now 4-0 to start the year. Now, sure, the strength of the schedule hasn't been the toughest. I mean, West Virginia, Illinois, and Iowa are still Power 5 wins, but certainly not the better of the Power 5 teams. But it's just tough to go against Penn State right now with how well they played on both sides of the ball. And Northwestern on the other side, you know, they had a nice upset win last time out, outright win and comeback victory against Minnesota last week. But I do think this could be a bit of a letdown spot for this team. Northwestern's offense looked strong in that game. Ben Bryant had 400 passing yards in that one. But he was a little bit banged up in that game, in that win against Minnesota. I'm a little bit concerned with him against this Penn State defense. You know, this is one of the best defenses in the country. Could be top 3 right now. And I think Ben Bryant could struggle. I think the turnovers are certainly an issue. He's already had 3 interceptions this season. And I don't think Northwestern's going to really do much of anything on the ground. They only had 3.2 yards per carry last week, 3.5 the week before. They were held to a half a yard per carry against Rutgers at the beginning of the season. So to me, if this is a game, this could be a game where Penn State gets out to a big lead early. And if that's the case, I just don't think Northwestern has the offense to really keep up and, you know, certainly not compete in this game, but let alone cover as a 4-touchdown underdog. I'm going to take the Penn State Nittany Lions and lay the points on the road. I just think they're too much for Northwestern. Next up, let's go to the Big 12 as Baylor takes on UCF. This one's going to be 3:30 Eastern start time on Fox Sports 1. Now, the big thing for this game is the status of quarterback Blake Shapen for Baylor. He was banged up a couple of weeks ago with an MCL injury, hasn't played since. You know, they were saying he may play against Texas. They decided to keep him out, and the coach, Dave Aranda, believed that he was about 1 week away. So, you know, this would make sense for him to play here, but even if Shapen plays in this game, I just don't trust this Baylor offense going into the bounce house against UCF in their Big 12 home opener. We know the UCF played Kansas State last week and lost that game and failed to cover the number, but this is the first home game for UCF as a Big 12 in the Big 12 schedule, and I expect it to be a very tough environment for the road team. UCF has a really good ground game, a bunch of running backs that can go for 5+ yards per carry. They're at there already this season. RJ Harvey at 5.4, Johnny Richardson at 7.4 yards per carry. Strong offensive line, decent quarterback play, and even though the defense did not do too well last week, it's still been strong overall this season, holding teams to 50% completion in the passing game. Really strong secondary effort for UCF this year. I think UCF is going to be way up for this game, and like I said, even if Shapen plays, I don't think it's going to be enough for Baylor, who has not been able to run the ball consistently this year. They haven't been great against the run themselves, giving up over 4.5 yards per carry. Give me UCF laying the points in Orlando. Next up, we see Arizona State taking on California. This one's going to be a 3 o'clock Eastern start time on the Pac-12 network. Now, both of these teams are coming off high-scoring games. Last week, we saw Arizona State lose to USC 42-28, so 70 points there. Cal lost to Washington 59-32, over 90 points in that one. But despite both of these teams' performances on both sides of the ball, we see a pretty low total in this matchup. I think for good reason, and I still think there's value on the under, despite the total dropping a few points from the opening line. As Arizona State, I don't think they do much of anything offensively in this game. It's been a pretty hideous offense so far this year. Only 17 points per game for a Pac-12 team, not what you want to see. The offensive line giving up 13 sacks combined the last 2 weeks. Running for only 3 yards per carry, and the quarterback play's also not been great. Injuries have played a role in that, but I really don't trust this Arizona State offense to do anything against Cal. The defense has actually been a positive surprise for this team this season. Now, Arizona State's defense has actually not been that bad. I mean, they held USC to 42 points, and holding a team to 42 points kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but USC was averaging over 55 points per game going into that one, so Arizona State's defense actually held in there a bit, and before that, they held each of their last 3 opponents to under 400 total yards, including a ranked team in Fresno State and a Power 5 team in Oklahoma State. I think we see more of a low-scoring game. I think Arizona State knows it cannot afford to get into a shootout in this ball game. So I think we see more of both these teams limiting the possessions in this one. I'm going to take the under in Arizona State, California. Next up, we go to the AAC as USF takes on Navy. This one, 3:30 Eastern. It's going to be on the CBS Sports Network. Now, I think this could be considered a bit of a letdown spot for USF, who held in there against Alabama, only lost by 14 points a couple of weeks ago at home, and then beat Rice outright last week at home, 42-29. I know it was a pretty nice win there. Rice hung in there with Houston, so pretty strong victory for the USF program. But this is going to be the first road game for USF since September 2nd, and his team has played 4 straight weeks, no bye week in between, since the beginning of the year. So we know USF failed to cover the spread. They lost outright by 17 points against Western Kentucky on the road in that game, and they don't have a lot of time to prepare for this triple option offense for Navy. I really don't like taking teams that don't have a lot of time to prepare for the triple option, and especially since USF has not faced Navy or a triple option team in quite a while, I just don't think this is a very good spot for their defense. I know USF's run defense has been better this year. It's been one of the big improvements for this team, but we can't forget that last year USF had one of the worst run defenses in college football, giving up over 6 yards per carry. So there are some regression concerns there. Navy's had an extra long time to prepare for this game. They had they played Memphis a couple of weeks ago. It was back on Thursday, September 14th. So they've had an extra long bye week to prepare for USF. I think Navy, the home team 3-0 against the spread and straight up in this series since 2000. I think Navy has got a really good matchup here. So give me Navy laying the points at home. Next up, let's go to the MAC Conference as Ball State takes on Western Michigan. Another game at 3:30 Eastern. This one's going to be on ESPN+. Let's call this one the Teams That Ron Got Wrong Bowl, as Ball State, I like their chances last week against Georgia Southern. They got absolutely crushed. Western Michigan, it didn't give them a lot of credit in that matchup against Toledo. They still lost that game by double digits, but covered the number in the end. And I'm going to say, I think I was wrong about both of these teams. I think Western Michigan has improved quite a bit each game that we've seen, as of late. They played a really tough schedule at the Carrier Dome against Syracuse, at Iowa, and then they open up conference play at Toledo, who I believe is still the best team in this MAC conference. But, Western Michigan's been able to run the ball better as of late. They even did so against Iowa with very strong defense, over 100 rushing yards in that game. The quarterback play's gotten a bit better week by week. Injuries have played a role in that, but I think their quarterback play will get better as the MAC conference schedule continues. And the defense, the secondary has actually been pretty solid. I'd like to see him get some more pressure on the opposing quarterback. Last week we saw no sacks for Western Michigan, but I think this team is actually improving week by week, and now they get their first home game and since the beginning of the season. Ball State last week, the offense, 4 sacks given up. They only ran for 37 rushing yards. The quarterback play was not much better, and the defense could not get a stop. Davis Brin had his way in that game, over 360 passing yards. I worry about this team on the road now. We saw Ball State earn a victory against an FCS opponent, but that's not going to get the job done here on the road. I'm going to take Western Michigan at a pretty good price here at home. I think they get the W. Next up, we see Missouri and Vanderbilt. This one's going to be 4 o'clock Eastern on the SEC Network. We've got 2 teams in this matchup that are in the bottom half of college football FBS in terms of plays per game, and a season series between these 2 teams that recently has been heavy to the under. 8-1 the under is in the last 9 meetings between these two. I think Vanderbilt's defense much improved from last year's team. We see them giving up less than 400 total yards per game this season. Missouri's defense, I think, is the real deal in the SEC this season, giving up only 2.6 yards per carry on the ground. The secondary's had some issues, but they're getting a lot of pressure on the opposing quarterbacks with at least 3 sacks each of the last 3 weeks and against some tough teams in Memphis and Kansas State included. So I'm going to take the under in this game. I think we see more of a lower scoring SEC type of battle, where we see the defenses rule the day. I don't really know if either of these teams are going to really do much on the ground. I think they're going to be forced to air it out a bit. And, while I think both of these quarterbacks are solid in Cook and Swan, I still think I think both of these defenses are better than what they're given credit for. So give me the under here in Missouri Vanderbilt. Next up, we'll stay in the SEC as LSU takes on Ole Miss. This one's going to be 6 o'clock Eastern. It's going to be your ESPN game, one of the only games this week where we see 2 ranked teams go against each other. And it should be a great ball game. LSU barely won against Arkansas last week. It was a nail-biter, 34-31. LSU was right around a 17, 18-point favorite in that game, so it didn't come close to covering the spread. A bit concerning for the defense, giving up over 400 total yards, 25 first downs in that game. I still think that the defense for LSU, a little bit suspect. I don't think the jury's completely out for this defense, and I do think Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin offense should be able to have a solid day, a bounce-back week at least, after last week's, disappointing result against Alabama. I do think Alabama is better defensively, and I think Alabama, playing in Tuscaloosa versus having a home game against LSU, a big difference there. I look for Ole Miss to bounce back, and the home team is absolutely dominant in this series. The last 10 meetings, they're 8-2 straight up and 9-1 against the spread. spread. I got to take the Ole Miss Rebels here plus the points. It's also worth a look to the over in this game with the over 5-1 in the last 6, but give me Ole Miss plus the points. Next up, we see Troy and Georgia State. This one's going to be 7 o'clock Eastern on ESPN+. Now, to me, you've got one of the better defenses in the Sun Belt in Troy going up against one of the better offenses in the Sun Belt in Georgia State. Now, typically, I do tend to side with the more defensive-minded team, especially at reasonable prices like this. But beyond that, Troy last week did not cover against Western Kentucky. They won by 3 points. They were laying 3.5. But I think Troy honestly deserved to cover. They outgained Western Kentucky by over 200 yards, and they held a really potent offense to 318 total yards and only 16 first downs. It was a really strong defensive showing from Troy, and this is already a defense, like I mentioned, one of the stronger ones in the conference going into the year. But I was really impressed with Gunnar Watson. The Troy offense, back-to-back weeks now with over 300 passing yards. This offense starting to get going, and the offensive line has had some issues. They've given up a lot of sacks, and that's why Gunnar Watson's had some issues here and there because of the pressure that's been put on him. But I still think Troy has a good week this week offensively against the Georgia State defense. It's not great, nothing to write home about. Pretty good against the run, not the best against the pass, giving up over 300 passing yards so far this season. I also think Georgia State's had a really weak strength of schedule, especially when it comes to facing the defenses that they've had. Rhode Island, UConn, Charlotte, Coastal Carolina. It's a rebuilding Coastal Carolina program. I'm not really impressed with any of those teams defensively, so I do think this is the toughest matchup that Georgia State's had by far this season, while Troy's already played Western Kentucky. James Madison's a solid mid-major team. Kansas State is, Power 5 opponent, and even Stephen F. Austin's one of the better FCS teams out there. So I'm going to take Troy in this matchup on the road. I like their chances here. Next up, we see South Carolina taking on Tennessee. This one's going to be a 7:30 Eastern start time. It's going to be on the SEC Network. Pretty interesting matchup here because it's a revenge game from last year's blowout loss for Tennessee, a stunning blowout loss. It was a good season for Tennessee overall in 2022, but 63-38 the final score in last year's matchup between these two in South Carolina, making the home team 3-1 against the spread in the last 4 meetings. We didn't see it coming last year, but I do think it's a much better matchup this year for Tennessee. South Carolina hung in there against Georgia this year. They played well against Mississippi State. They earned the W, I should say. They gave up over 500 total yards in that game to Mississippi State, who I think is going through a rebuilding year. So I wasn't really impressed with that win for South Carolina. Now USC goes on the road here against Tennessee, a program that we know has been a lot better at home in Neyland than it's been on the road. We saw this year their only road game, losing outright to Florida as a 5.5, 6-point favorite. And Joe Milton, especially as a quarterback throughout his collegiate career, has been much better at home where he doesn't have to deal with the noise of the opposing stadium. I think Milton has a really good game here against South Carolina's secondary that gave up almost 500 yards last week and has given up over 300 yards overall this season, 68% completion to opposing quarterbacks. I think Tennessee's offense scores at will here. I think the defense makes the necessary stops to win this game and cover the number in the end. I think Tennessee gets its revenge in this one. Next up, we see Michigan State taking on Iowa, the final game we're going to talk about for Saturday's card in college football. This one in the Big Ten, 7:30 Eastern. It's going to be on NBC. And I know a lot of people are usually pretty hesitant, and rightfully so, to lay double digits with Iowa with how poor their offense has been. We saw last week getting shut out and at Penn State, only 76 total yards, only 4 first downs. It was a hideous game offensively. But I think this is a much better matchup for Iowa, facing a Michigan State team that, plainly put, has some distractions going on right now in terms of the front office and the coaching staff. We learned that Michigan State's expected to fire Mel Tucker, but it's also a Michigan State team and a defense that's only 1 week removed from giving up over 700 total yards to Washington in a 41-7 blowout loss. And even last week against Maryland, where Michigan State made some improvements, it was still a lopsided final score, 31-9. 2 home games, by the way, for Michigan State in those first 2 games. And they haven't been on the road yet this season. I really don't like the spot for Michigan State at all on really either side of the ball. Even though Iowa struggled offensively, the defense is still, I believe, one of the better defenses in the country, not just the conference. I think the offense on paper is still one of the best offenses for Iowa we've seen in quite some time with Cade McNamara at quarterback. I think this is a much better matchup. Give me Iowa laying the points at home to end the night. And that's it. Those are the games for Week 5 in college football. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to put your college football picks in the comments section below. Again, if you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.